Shohei Ohtani was supposed to return to the mound and dominate again. So why has his comeback suddenly become uncertain? Shohei Ohtani was supposed to be one of the biggest stories of the 2026 MLB season. After returning to the mound, the two-way superstar looked like he was ready to remind the baseball world exactly why he is considered one of the most extraordinary players of his generation. But now, something has changed. A lingering problem in his left knee has already forced the Dodgers to repeatedly delay his pitching schedule. And then came another concern. His right biceps wasn't 100% either. Suddenly, the question is no longer simply, when will Ohtani pitch again? The bigger question is, will the Dodgers have their two-way superstar fully ready when the games matter most? To understand why this situation matters so much, you have to understand what Ohtani represents to the Dodgers. Most MLB players specialize in one side of the game, pitching or hitting. Ohtani does both, and that's exactly what makes every physical issue more complicated for him. A problem that might only affect one part of another player's game can potentially affect two completely different workloads for Ohtani. The Dodgers have therefore been extremely cautious with his pitching workload. And despite the uncertainty, Ohtani has continued to produce at the plate. That distinction is important. The current situation isn't simply that Ohtani cannot play baseball. It's that the pitching side of his two-way role has become the major concern. The knee issue began to become a real storyline in June. Ohtani experienced discomfort in his left knee during a June 11th game in Pittsburgh. The Dodgers evaluated the knee, and imaging did not show structural damage. But the discomfort didn't completely disappear, and there was an important difference between hitting and pitching. Ohtani explained that the knee bothered him much more when he was pitching than when he was hitting. That makes sense when you consider the forces involved in the pitching motion. Every pitch requires Ohtani to plant, rotate, and generate enormous force through his lower body. So even though he could continue hitting, the Dodgers had to think differently about putting him back on the mound. By July, the issue had become persistent enough to change his pitching schedule. And eventually, the Dodgers decided that continuing to push wasn't worth the risk. On July 10th, Ohtani was scratched from his scheduled pitching start because of the ongoing left knee irritation. The Dodgers also decided that he would not participate in the All-Star game. Ohtani could still hit, but pitching was a different story. Manager Dave Roberts made the organization's position clear. They wanted Ohtani healthy for the long term, rather than rushing him back for another regular season start. And this is where the story becomes especially interesting. Because the Dodgers weren't saying, Ohtani is done pitching. Quite the opposite. They expected him to pitch again during the season, but they were willing to wait. That meant Ohtani's return became less about a specific date, and more about how his body responded from one throwing session to the next. There was at least some encouraging news. On July 22nd, Ohtani threw a 30-pitch bullpen session in Philadelphia, and afterward, he reported that he felt good. That appeared to be a step forward. But the Dodgers still weren't ready to put him straight back into a game. Roberts emphasized that there was no reason to rush. The priority was making sure Ohtani's arm would be ready when the stakes became much higher later in the season. And then another issue entered the picture. The right biceps. On July 3rd, Ohtani had already experienced tightness in his right biceps. The timing was notable. He had just completed a season-high 110 pitches against the San Diego Padres. Ohtani said the biceps discomfort was noticeable while swinging, rather than while pitching, and he initially expected it to disappear quickly. But by late July, the biceps still wasn't completely back to normal. That became another reason for the Dodgers to remain cautious with his pitching progression. And now the team had two things to monitor: a left knee that wasn't completely settled, and a right biceps that wasn't completely healthy. For a player whose entire two-way value depends on being able to both hit and pitch, that's a difficult combination. So when will Shohei Ohtani pitch again? That's the question fans desperately want answered. But as of now, there isn't a simple date. And that's intentional. The Dodgers don't appear interested in setting an aggressive timetable and then forcing Ohtani to meet it. Instead, they're taking a flexible approach: bullpen session, recovery, evaluation. Then another decision. The reason is simple. The Dodgers aren't only thinking about August, they're thinking about September and potentially October. If Ohtani can return later in the regular season and be fully prepared for the postseason, that could be far more valuable than rushing him back for a few starts now. Another major factor is the Dodgers themselves. Los Angeles has built enough depth that the organization doesn't have to treat every Ohtani pitching start as an emergency. The Dodgers can afford to be patient. And that changes the equation. If Ohtani were on a team fighting simply to stay alive in the standings, the pressure might be completely different. But the Dodgers' priority is bigger than one regular season game. They want Ohtani healthy when the postseason arrives. And there's another advantage. Even while his pitching has been delayed, Ohtani can still contribute as a designated hitter. That means the Dodgers don't necessarily have to choose between having Ohtani available and protecting his pitching workload. They can continue getting his bat in the lineup while they carefully manage his return to the mound. So what should fans watch for next? The first major sign will be his throwing progression. Not just whether Ohtani throws, but how his knee responds afterward. The second is his right biceps. If that issue continues to settle, the path toward pitching becomes much clearer. And finally, there is the question of workload. Even if Ohtani returns to the mound, the Dodgers may not immediately treat him like a fully ramped-up starting pitcher. The goal will likely be progression rather than instant maximum workload. Because at this point, the Dodgers don't need to prove that Ohtani can pitch in July. They need to know whether he can pitch when the season is on the line. Shohei Ohtani's 2026 season isn't over, and the Dodgers are still expecting him to pitch again. But the path back to the mound has become much more complicated than anyone hoped. First came the lingering left knee problem. Then came the right biceps concern, and now every bullpen session carries more importance. Because Ohtani isn't simply trying to return to baseball, he's trying to return as a two-way player. And that makes this comeback unlike almost any other in Major League Baseball. The biggest question isn't whether Shohei Ohtani can still hit. We've already seen that he can. The question is whether his body will allow him to once again do something almost nobody else in baseball can do: dominate as both a hitter and a pitcher. And if the Dodgers get the answer they're hoping for, we could be watching one of the most fascinating second halves of the 2026 season. Because Shohei Ohtani's comeback story may not be over yet. Subscribe for more MLB news, updates, and in-depth player stories.